Hello, I'm Frank Epstein, founder and president of Collage New Music. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our latest online presentation entitled The Composer Speaks. The Composer Speaks is an opportunity to introduce composers directly to you. Our guest today is John Heiss. John is a longtime supporter of Collage and in our early years served on our artistic advisory board. John is recognized as a celebrated instructor and chamber music coach at the New England Conservatory of Music, where he continues to be sought out for his inspired teaching. Collage, in turn, has commissioned and premiered many of his works. It is a pleasure to welcome John to this format and to be able to hear him speak. John will be interviewed by music director David Hoose. We thank you all for joining us, and we hope this experience will bring you closer to new music and the composers who write it.
John Heiss, what a great pleasure to see you. Dear friend, great colleague, teacher of mine, although indirectly, we'll talk about that. And I'm thrilled that we're able to speak with you today. It's been about it coming on 6 months since COVID hit the world. And I'm wondering how that time has treated you as far as your work goes.
Yeah, it's not easy to answer that. It's been variable, and there've been days due to my own personal condition where I'm not in great shape, and other days when I am in pretty good shape. I'll tell you, if it's appropriate for this, and it probably is, that I have myelodysplastic syndrome. It's a cancer of the blood cells in your bone marrow, which are supposed to regenerate good red blood, and it's not working very well. And so I've been getting blood transfusions for about 2 years and thriving on them. And when I have the blood, I feel like I could do the marathon. And when I go 2 weeks out like I am now, I feel rather weak and looking forward to the next one. But it's going well. I was able to teach a full year at New England Conservatory. I got hooked up to do the online teaching with the aid of some very good support from NEC staff. Allie in particular, Allie Eaton was faculty secretary, and a couple of my students. And so I think I taught pretty well. I learned how to do it, and everybody was amazed. That tells me then that this is something I'm going to keep doing. And I've been telling people at the school that now, after my 53 years, that I've worked hard and finally reached the midpoint of my tenure. And so it goes well, and I haven't been composing much, but I was able to write the piece in memory of my son, which Ken Radnofsky premiered earlier this year in February. And now there are ideas floating around, particularly something vocal probably is going to happen soon. And there have been several people asking me for solo pieces. And the other part of my life, of course, is the whole COVID thing. I do have somebody attending the house here who is a very safe and very experienced person. We spent 2 months with her wearing the mask, and we think we're safe now not to do that. And then my family comes and we visit outside on the porch usually. I have a niece and 2 nephews right in the neighborhood. A little boy, this is worth telling, he's just barely 1 year old. And I was singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for him. He was listening with his eyes bugged out. And I finished the last phrase with a little extra note. And I went bum, 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 bum. And he went back,
Oh,
an octave higher, but the same note I'd been singing, he sang. And he's not yet 1.
a little John Heiss.
Oh, I don't know, but a little somebody boy, pay attention to him. And so life is good. I'm lonely a lot, but there's an awful lot you can do. I'm listening to recordings some of yours that I have, of course, and some of John's works, and Peter Child, whom I've performed a couple of works by. And so I listen to their music, which I like a lot. I listen to an awful lot of Bach, a fair amount of Stravinsky and Ives and Schoenberg, because those are my three people that I've been teaching for years and years, and some other new music that comes in, some by my students in my graduate composition seminar this past spring. They wrote, some of them, several striking pieces. In one piece that all 14 of them each wrote 5 measures of. It's called Esprit de Corps, and it's fantastic. I'll have to get that out to you at some point. So you listen a lot, you talk a lot on the phone, and you play the piano a fair amount when it's in your home here. I play more piano than I do flute now. I just don't have the chops for the flute to sound like the way it used to. And of course I miss it, but I've gotten much more into the piano. And David, I've been reading tons, biographies mainly, and I've been studying, let's see, I've been looking at several new books on Ives that are not bad. I'm looking at everything I can lay my hands on by or about John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy, whom I thought very highly of. Ted Williams, the Red Sox outfielder, thought very highly of.
What are the books about John Kennedy that you've been reading that you like?
Arthur Schlesinger is a good one. Mm-hmm. He wrote a very good one on Robert Kennedy, which I don't think is well known. It's fantastic. And the speech that Bobby Kennedy gave the night that he had to tell an audience in, I'm trying to remember, it might have been Minneapolis, where he had to tell the audience, which is primarily black, that Martin Luther King had been assassinated an hour earlier. And that's an unbelievable thing that he said there, able to deliver one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard without any preparation at all. And so one book I do want to recommend to anybody, which is little known, is RFK's description of the Cuban Missile Crisis, an incredible book called 13 Days, where he recounts virtually every minute between the time they discovered the missiles and between the time that Khrushchev backed off and pulled them out. And it's a study to tell everyone on this planet how you can get along with an enemy, and how to allow the enemy some room, and not to come in with an atom bomb right away or ever. And it's beautifully written. It seems like it's simple, but the issues that he raises there, and the discussions that he gives us about how he talked to whom, and who spoke about what point of view when they were having their meetings, but also some behind the scenes talks with Russian agents, or Soviet agents as they were called then. It's just very eye-popping, illuminating, profound. And so every night I pick out something to read, and then I end up staying up late. So that's been a big part of my life. So, David, that's a terribly long answer. Sorry.
That's great, John. Let me drag you back into music. I heard you say in an interview that being in tune is the closest we can be to God. And so I thought I'd let you elaborate a bit on that rather profound statement.
There's a profound truth in music that the intervals have a definite evocative, telling meaning, and when the notes are right, you're going, ah. I would say that that's one of my goals in life, is to hear the right note. Stravinsky once called me a pitch doctor after a rehearsal where I was fixing notes in his Requiem and his variations for orchestra, and I was so struck by that I couldn't actually say anything to him. It seemed such a surprise. It was also funny. It was affectionate, and it was telling, because I remember what I said to him. I said, the notes are beautiful. I want to hear them. And he said, thank you very much, but you helped us a lot. I usually listen to the recording after the first rehearsal and then find the pitches, but you got that done for us a little earlier than has been my usual experience. And so that was a way of being named something by somebody that I revered. And I was in such awe that I was even talking to him at all, that I didn't say a lot back. I think now he had wanted me maybe to respond more, but I just said that I just love your notes and wanted to get them right.
Your comment about good intonation bringing you as close to God as we can get reminds me of a less profound version of that, in that Pierre Boulez was asked by someone, Maestro, you conduct the Vienna Philharmonic, the Berlin Philharmonic, and these Cleveland Orchestra, and you spend a lot of time tuning those orchestras. Those are great orchestras. And don't they play in tune? And why do you do that? And Mr. Boulez said, well, when it's in tune, don't you think it sounds better? so he might not have invoked the name of God in it, but it really is the same idea, that especially music where the harmony is a bit complex, when it's out of tune, it just sounds gray and kind of indistinguishable from anything else. But when it's in tune, the universe resonates.
Yep, and it affects the players. You fix up something and then they play it again and then they all go, ah. There's something that makes you go zoom. As soon as you get to hear that done the right way, and you think, yep, life is worth living. One of my first memories in life, David, was going to to a nursery school when I was just about to be 4. I was still 3, I think, or maybe I was 4. I can't remember. I certainly wasn't 5. I went to the nursery school, and the teacher played the piano, and she started playing Mary Had a Little Lamb on different notes than my grandmother had played it for me, even just a few weeks earlier.
You mean a different key?
Exactly, but I'm telling it to you as a 3-year-old. Here's it.
Right. Oh, the notes are wrong. The notes are wrong.
Yeah. Well, no, they weren't wrong, but they weren't the ones I knew.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, what's going on with this? And I ran up and pulled on her dress, and I said, why are you playing it on those notes? And she gave me a very weird look and said, I'll be talking to your parents. And I thought, I blew it the first day of nursery school. The first thing I made was a mistake. So I came home and I was waiting for the axe to fall, and then my mom and dad brought it up, and then I said, well, what do I have to get punished for interrupting class? And they said, no, that wasn't why she called us. She thinks she wants us to run out and get you a piano as soon as possible. So then I found out what a key was, and that things could transpose, and that although it was a different sense of pitches, it was a way of looking at something from a different direction or through a different eyeglass. And my grandmother, of course, played them in C major, and the teacher played them in A major. So that's a fairly big difference to a little kid. So that troubled me. And then I found out that I had something called perfect pitch. And then I thought, well, I guess that's going to help. Then I found out that when you play a C on a clarinet, it comes out B flat. And then I thought, what the hell is this? And I showed my teacher in school, and the teacher said, oh, that's the way that works. And I said, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
What is your first memory of music that you loved? Do you know when that was and what that music was?
There were quite a few things. Certainly hearing my first piano teacher playing Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring. That hooked me for life right there. And the great arrangement that was made had just come out, and she played that at the end of a little recital that we all gave.
The Myra Hess version, probably.
Yeah, that one, that's right. And then I remember, of course, I went to church a lot, and a lot of the best hymns seemed to be by a fellow whose name was spelled B-A-C-H. and so I got into the hymns very much when they were the more contrapuntal ones and with the more adventurous harmonies. When I was very young, I didn't, know that was going to have lifelong value to me, but it did and does still today. a drop in a aside, I decided to learn all 389 chorales in my last summer at Princeton, and I succeeded to do so. And I can still probably play 200 of them by memory right now. If you want, I can take 2 hours to do that. But I think they're so good and they're so nourishing and they're so true. They tell the truth. And I think it was C.P. Bach made the first edition, and he said my father's chorales are as unerring as the planets. I remember that line. But other than that, of course, there was some jazz around. I latched on to Gershwin very early without knowing who he was or anything. And then my mom got me a piano teacher to teach me how to play by ear as I was also learning classical piano. She wanted me to learn some jazz and popular music at the same time with a different teacher. And then, I finally picked up the flute when I was 9 and the saxophone when I was 12, 13. And all the way along, I was loving and listening to things. But, the things that you love when you're little never go away.
Well, I was going to say, music seems to have been such an omnipresent force in your life from a very young child through high school. How is it that you ended up being a math major as an undergraduate?
One has parents.
That's right.
And, I had a wonderful father who was very close to me. He was my closest friend the whole first half of my life, probably. And he was also quite a brilliant man and a very warm-hearted man. His profession was law. He thought you can always do music, but you won't be able to get much of an income from that, John. We'll probably want you to train in some other area. You're so good in math. Why don't you do that? And then he got me jobs, summer jobs. He had the contacts to get me a summer job at IBM. And I did that for 4 summers in a row during high school. And I was going to be a computer programmer. That's what they had lined up for me. And I was going to write a program. I did write a program the year before I was a senior. I think that was when that was. Yeah. I wrote a program for Arabian American Oil on the early IBM 704 to enable a topographical map to be made of a uniform density at different depths in an oil field. And I thought I was going there, and I was enjoying it, but I didn't like the corporation atmosphere very much. And I was loving music and get kind of interested in math. And there are several things that led me to it. My father, of course, did not want me to go on in music. And when I turned in to do it, there was about a year where he was terrified. And he came around beautifully. But let me think how to tell this story. My mom thought that I should do the jazz. My father thought I should do the IBM. And I was influenced by both my parents. I wanted to do what they thought I should do. And I wasn't totally swayed, but I thought that if that's what they think, let me do a try on this and see how that goes. So that same summer I did the program for IBM, something very funny happened. I had sent in a tape of my saxophone playing in my own band at my junior year at college to a new jazz school opening up in Lenox, Massachusetts, headed by John Lewis of the Modern Jazz Quartet and a fellow named Gunther Schuller. And I was accepted and given a full scholarship. And I got the job offer from IBM, and they offered me a good salary. And I thought, oh my God, here I am faced with a dilemma. So I turned down the job at the jazz school. And then it turned out all of my jazz friends that I knew all over the country, a lot of them were there, and they only accepted 2 saxophonists with full scholarship. One was me, the other was Ornette Coleman. Well, I thought, oh God, why did I turn that down?
What have I done?
Yeah, well, I thought I should have died. I felt bad. I thought I should have done the other side of it. What held me off a little bit was that everybody in those years was shooting dope and recommending that you do that. You'll be a better player. And of course, that's what killed Charlie Parker and a number of other wonderful jazz musicians whom I knew and admired. I sat in once with Dave Brubeck not at Birdland, but the 5-Spot Cafe, and then Ornette once at the 5-Spot Cafe. And I also got to sit in with Sam Most and Herbie Mann, a wonderful flute quartet that they had. And I was doing serious jazz, but I didn't think that I wasn't sure that I would go that way. But what happened was I met a number of people, especially Jonathan Elkus at Lehigh, who was a composer himself and the music teacher there, who introduced to me some great band pieces. The symphonies, Winds by Stravinsky, the Intimate Symphony in B flat, which was not quite as good, but pretty good, and a marvelous piece by Arnold Schoenberg, the theme and variations for band, and some fine British band stuff, whole suite number 1 and number 2. I love them all. And I got to meet Felix Greisley, Schoenberg's brother-in-law, who came over from New York to introduce the theme and variations for band, and I made an outline of the form of the piece. And we got together over lunch, and he said, "Boy, that's a very good outline. Aren't you going on music?" I said, "I think so." And but I wasn't sure. And when I graduated, this is what made the difference. I was taking my final math test, David, in a course called Complex Variable. That's the most sophisticated course you could take in math in college in those years. It means you're studying both the integral and differential calculus in the same course of functions that have the square root of -1 in them, which is, of course, an impossible number. But it comes to exist in formulations that you work out on the page, and you have to account for it. So it's called I, and you get that I will show up at some point, and then you have to factor it back out again to be living in the real world. I needed an 80 to pass that course. I was not doing well at all, and I didn't get it, really. I went to take the final, and I got in there and thought, this can't be the right course that I'm taking the final for. So I asked the teacher, and he said, "No, it is the right course. Do the best you can." Well, I filled out what I could and handed it in, and it wasn't much, and he gave me a funny look. I said, "Will you tell Professor Goulden I'll be down to see him tomorrow morning?" So I went down to see the Professor Goulden, a very warm-hearted guy, brilliant too, by the way, but he could be funny. He said, "Oh, here you are." And I said, "Well, yeah, here I am. I just did the worst I've ever done on an exam in my life." And he said, "John, I've been teaching 35 years, and this is the worst I've ever seen in my 35 years of teaching." I said, "What was my grade?" He said, "Out of 100, you get an 18.
Random guessing might have gotten you more.
Well, it was random guessing that got me that. But I just said, "Well, I'm going to be studying music in New York. I have a flute teacher at Juilliard. I'm going to take some courses at Columbia. And I think that I might not go on in math. I'm not sure." And he said, "John, I want you to promise me something right now. I want you to promise me that you will never go on in math. And if you do, I will pass you and get you out of here." And he gave me a D-.
Oh, that's very sweet. That's great. Yeah. Let me play a game with you. Quick choice, Bach or Handel?
Don't ask me to make that choice.
Okay.
I guess it has to be Bach, of course.
Ravel or Debussy?
Both, please.
Both, please.
But both, yeah. I think Ravel has a little more lightness of being that catches my fancy.
Brahms, Schumann?
Good questions. I guess Brahms a little more than Schumann. But, Schumann wrote some fantastic songs, and he wrote some fantastic solo piano pieces. And, you can't shoot.
I know this is
down.
painful for you.
Yeah.
And I know the answer to Bruckner Mahler. So, and now this one will really annoy you. Stravinsky, Schoenberg.
It's an impossible one to answer because, their intentions are so different, and they had such a conflict between them, which was delicious to study and learn about. And I can't imagine the one without the other. They have a terrific enmity for each other that drove their lives and nourished many of their compositions. Schoenberg once said that Stravinsky should be called Modernsky. He's living in the past, pretending to be in part of the present. And Stravinsky said, well, some people can do more with 7 notes and others can do with 12. And, they went back and forth, and it was in the music, of course, the new classicism cantata of Schoenberg. Moses and Aaron of Schoenberg is by him, and Stravinsky, of course. So Brahms or Wagner, it's the same as that. There's a rivalry there, and neither one of them is as good as the two of them together fighting each other.
That's a wonderful, wonderful way to look at those sometimes contentious relationships. Either one needs the other. So we talked a little bit about Schoenberg and a little bit about Stravinsky, two composers whose music you love dearly. And you have in passing mentioned Charles Ives, but I know that he is as close to your heart as Schoenberg and Stravinsky are.
Certainly.
I think for a lot of people, Ives...
And Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven.
Well, of course, yes. I'm thinking of the 20th century guys.
Right. Okay.
I think some people think that Ives was a messy composer. And I know you don't, but I thought...
Oh, no, I listen. No, he was messy. But you give him a break. He didn't have anything played. The one score that he did have read and rehearsed was 3 Places in New England, and the score that he produced for Nicholas Slonimsky's New England Chamber Orchestra for that 1931 tour of Europe is immaculate. And what he put down there is fantastic footnotes and how to count out certain rhythms and all of the allusions that we know his music is making are spelled out in more detail in that work than any other work. He even has a program for each work, and he discusses that. That's what he would have done if he had performances. And so what he does, he writes short scores, and then the other scholars come along and realize what he intended, I think, with great integrity and great accuracy.
I think my use of the word messy has 2 meanings. One, we know that the scores were problematic often, but I think for the novice listener, even a piece like 3 Places in New England, or Decoration Day, or certainly the 4th Symphony, can sound chaotic and like pandemonious. And I know that he is occasionally after pandemonium of a sort, of the marching bands and all of that around the town square. But I think my impression of you and your understanding of Charles Ives' music is that you think of it as far more organized and disciplined than perhaps the occasional listener might.
Yes, that's probably true. Ives is a special cup of tea, and you have to taste it and drink it and think about it a little bit, but mainly get familiar with Ives through the good recordings. I want to recommend again Ben Zander's Third Symphony with the Boston Philharmonic. Probably anything that you've done for Ives. I've never heard you make a mistake in Ives or anything faintly other than that makes me wonder at your ability. And so you've got to go to the right people for Ives. Certainly John Kirkpatrick and Gunther Schuller and Jim Sinclair and the people associated with him, Helen Boatwright, Jan de Gaetani, Gil Kalish. Those people knew what they were doing, and they were making up a kind of music that has an air of spontaneity and almost improvisation. And they know how to understand what he wrote in terms of a context of American popular music idioms that he is developing in a more formal and elevated, cultivated way than they were intended in their original compositions. What he does for the hymns is unbelievable. He hears those hymns and he hears music that they can produce, and then you go to the Third Symphony, you see, I didn't even know that about those pieces. And so he does, to your ear, at least my ear, sound like music that's rather close to the jazz that I grew up with. And he always said this, let me be very clear about this. I love ambiguity. Even said somewhere else, ambiguity is a form of greater nearness to perfect truth. And so he's doing that because he wants to do it.
So, for the novice listener, what are the three Ives pieces that you think open the door to that composer most easily?
He began using music of one strand, and simple settings like the first song he ever wrote when he was 11 is an absolute gem. It's called Slow March, song number 114 in the 114 songs. Go listen to that. It's about the burial of the family dog, and it's an 11-year-old, and it's a work of genius. Probably the songs can get you into him more as long as you don't go to the highly complex ones or the overly simplistic ones. Maybe everybody should simply buy the recording of Jan de Gaetani and Gil Kalish called Charles Ives Songs. It's on None Such, 71325, if I remember that right. That'll do it for you if nothing else will. But then another zone would be certainly the Holidays Symphony, which are each four movements about the different national holidays. And I would agree with Stravinsky, who called Decoration Day the finest work ever composed by an American. That's what he said when he heard that for the first time in his life. And you could do what he did, which is he stopped composing for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and he copied the score out for piano, 4 hands, and then for 2 pianos. And then he and Bob Kraft spent days practicing it. And Kraft said, "You're working on your variations." He said, "No, I've heard something that changes my horizons. I can't go on until I've at least come to grips with this a little bit." So he put into his late orchestra variations, Stravinsky did, the late orchestra variations, 3 variations which are chaotic. And those are, of course, a tribute to Ives right there. It's already the late Stravinsky hearing Ives for the first time. Almost everybody that heard Ives, by the way, heard them when they were already grown up and they didn't know that he existed. I can never forget the first song I ever heard. Looning played it in composition class at Columbia, and it was General William Booth, Enters into Heaven. Unbelievable song. It's a kind of opera, practically. And I remember several people in my composition class, one of whom I already mentioned the name of, I won't bother bringing him up again, but he hated it. He thought it was foolish. I loved it. I flipped out. I said, "Oh my God, I didn't know there was music like this that could even exist." And so that's a song you could check out. It's certainly difficult, but the text makes clear why. And it's about the Booth family, one of whom was the assassin of President Lincoln. And they were all great actors in the 19th century. Now I've set one of those poems by Nicholas Fackel Lindsay, the poet. Certainly, Decoration Day is the closest to my heart of practically any piece. That stands with the first movement of the St. Matthew Passion and Amin Azari and the Magic Flute. And just some pieces that are too profound even to talk about. Certainly a lot of Petrushka. And you just go, "Oh, thank God such a thing exists." But then probably Ives' Third Symphony would be the last one, because that's still polite. He hasn't gotten rude. He hasn't gotten rude there.
Right.
Except you don't want to play the edition that he put out in the 40s with a whole lot of dissonances. They're added on later. It doesn't work very well. I don't think I'd recommend that recording, but the Third Symphony is what you hear when you go to church. And he imagines, what a friend we have in Jesus. And then all 4,000 tongues to sing. That's almost the same as the beginning of the other hymn. They both involve a minor third, a major third, and then a minor third coming down. They're both harmonized with a 1 chord going to a 4 chord. If you ask which one he's quoting, the best answer you can give is yes.
So, John, tell us about the piece you wrote in memory of your son for saxophone and piano. Tell us a little bit about that piece, of what it obviously what it means to you, but something defining features of the piece.
Well, this is the nocturne, as you can see, and in memory of my son, and commissioned by Ken Radnofsky. Uh, Ken came over and played a lot for me. I'd already sketched out a number of melodic ideas and a few harmonic ones, and wasn't sure how the whole thing was going to come together. And Ken began by playing quarter tones on the saxophone that were rather well tuned. And I asked him to show me a lot about that. And I've been thinking about not only quarter tones, but I have students now that are doing a 72 note octave instead of a 12 note octave, 24. What Ken did was haunting, and it sounded like a kind of, he did it going down, which is a little easier, by the way. And he then convinced me that that was how I should begin my piece. It begins with a falling scale in quarter tones. You can probably see that opening line, a long note, and then it just descends and it says play freely. And it's a kind of sighing. And I think when we are trying to sigh in music or express something like a sigh, particularly if it's sadness that we're sighing about, the half step is a little too big. And the quarter tone leads you away from the normal intonation you expect that goes with that gesture. And so I developed that idea and then tried several different places for it to happen in the register, several different dynamics, several different rhythms. And it's all notated freely, but with specific small differences so that it can be played as if it's improvised. And then finally, a kind of monologue for the saxophone who plays underneath the piano lid. And so you're getting these melodic phrases that suddenly seem to still be ringing after he stopped playing. And that is certainly an image of somebody who was here and who is not. It's probably something fairly specific there. I can't put exact words to it, but it sounds ghost-like. And if it's done right, which means the saxophone player has to cut off fairly sharply and play into the most resonant part of the piano, which is up near the where the pianist is sitting, and get underneath the lid as much as you can get. And that's where you have the widest aperture. The lid is the widest, most wide open at that point. You're going to get the feedback. George Crumb did that in the 11 Echoes of Autumn, which I once played with Musica Viva, I think. And the other composers have used it a bit, but this became a metaphor for a life and an afterlife that seemed very moving and gripping. Everybody that was in the audience asked me, did you ever hear anything like that before? And I told them I had, but I made something a little different out of it than what I had heard. And I remember Andrea Kalin in particular, and a couple of my composition students, and a couple of my composer colleagues, they all remarked on it. And they said this became not a special effect, but a fundamental experience in listening to the piece. So there's a good deal of that.
It is a piece that we have programmed for this coming collage season, if we have a season. And so we'll all look forward to hearing it in person whenever that is able to be. John, it's an enormous pleasure to speak with you. I'm so grateful that you've spent this time with me and with all of us. We look forward to hearing more and more of your music and getting to hear your voice in so many different ways, whether it's talking about music or your own music. We love it, and we love you very much.
David, thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much.
That's a love in the other direction too. Let me tell you, you guys and what you've done for music and for me personally over the years, and your contribution to the music of Boston is one of the greatest reasons that I'm happy here.
Lots of love to you, John. Be
See you
well.
soon, David. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
John Heiss composed his Arguments and Meditations for Collage New Music in 2006. Like all of John's music, and like John himself, this work is clear, precise, energetic, and deeply felt. Cast in a single movement, Arguments and Meditations is about 9 minutes long, and it is scored for flute, oboe, clarinet, violin, cello, double bass, piano, and percussion.